All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's special webinar on building equity, race, class, and protected bike lanes. My name is Kit Keller, Executive Director of APBP, the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is a collaboration between APBP and PeopleForBikes Green Lane Project. We have applied for continuing education for this particular webinar, so if that's something of interest to you, here is what you need to do. Sign in on your host's sign-in sheet if you're watching in a group, and we hope you are, so that you can share ideas during and after the webinar. And any site hosts, we ask that you send us back that completed sign-in sheet. If you need a certificate of attendance, you can also download one at the location here. APBP has a biennial conference coming up in St. Louis later this year in September and October, and we do ask all of you to strongly consider our call for speakers. We have decided to extend it a week. We had heard that people were working diligently, but that March 16th might not be enough time, so we have gone ahead and proactively extended it an additional week. So please take a look at apbp.org and see what you might be able to bring to the table. All right, without further ado, let's meet our three presenters. We have Michael Anderson, Green Lane Project Staff Writer, PeopleForBikes; Chema Hernandez-Gill, Community Organizer, San Francisco Bicycle Coalition; and Martha Ruskowski, Vice President of Local Innovation for PeopleForBikes. And now I'd like to give a bit more detail about each of them. And I do think that Michael is correct. He may be the only person who has been simultaneously a member of APBP and the Online News Association, so bravo. We're excited to have Michael here today because he is the author of much of the report that we'll be speaking of today. And Chema Hernandez-Gill is managing the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition's many programs, including Community Bike Build, and his background is in engineering with a heavy dose of community and media activism. We're delighted to have him here with us today. And Martha Ruskowski is a regular speaker. I think many of you have heard her before and had a chance to meet her when we had the previous APBP Professional Development Seminar in 2013 in Boulder. Martha has been very active in a variety of ways in the field, including through her campaign work with the America Bikes campaign back in 2002, 2004, and before that she was the Executive Director of Bicycle Colorado. And with that, Martha, I will pass the controls to you. You will see the message that you have been made the presenter.
Great, thank you, Kit.
Welcome.
Let me get my slideshow up. Voila. Okay. Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here today. Very excited about the release of our new report called Building Equity, Race, Class, and Protected Bike Lanes. It is available today on the web as a download. It will be available in hard copy through us next week. Before we dive into this report, Michael Anderson is going to take you on a tour of the report. He and Mary Lauren Hall from the Alliance for Biking and Walking were the authors of this report. I want to give you just a little bit of background on how we came to write this report and tell you about two other resources and programs that we're working on that may be of interest and value to you. So first I want to tell you really briefly, Green Lane Project is an effort of PeopleForBikes. We are a national nonprofit. Green Lane Project is focused really specifically on getting protected bike lanes on the ground in U.S. cities and into the U.S. design toolbox. We focus on them because they've been the missing piece of our infrastructure approach of what do we do on big busy streets. So for the past 3 years, People for Bikes, Green Lane Project has acted as kind of the strategists of getting protected bike lanes on the ground. We've seen big growth in protected bike lanes, as you probably know, across the country. They have tripled over the last 4 years. Green Lane Project, one of our main efforts has been to select 6 focus cities every year or every 2 years and help them get projects on the ground. Part of that program when we select cities is we take some of their leaders on international study tours. This is a picture of one of our first study tours with Green Lane Project in 2012 in Deventer in the Netherlands with delegation from Austin, Memphis, and Washington, D.C. And during one of our daily debriefs, the leaders of these delegations said, we need to talk about equity, about bike lanes and equity. We have challenges bringing these facilities into low-income neighborhoods. We're wrestling with issues of gentrification. Let's talk about this. I will say up front that we are not experts in equity, but at the request of our cities, we have been, trying to figure out what kind of tools can be provided, what's going on that will be helpful to these city leaders. So we come to this from a very humble place of wanting to continue the conversation and bring new resources to the table. As a follow-up to that conversation, we hosted an equity summit in Austin in 2013 and brought in leaders from each of our 6 cities to again dive deeper into the equity issues to enhance our understanding and sort of collectively figure out what can be helpful. What we learned is that equity is complicated. There is a lot of stuff that gets dumped into the bucket we call equity. It is not monolithic at all. That the issues of homeless people having safe access to jobs is different than issues surrounding gentrification. It's different than the work of Black Women Bike, which is middle-class Black women, getting on bikes and celebrating the joy of riding bikes recreationally. So there is no silver bullet, which led us to really understand that our focus area was around protected bike lanes and what are the issues around getting them on the ground. Before we go into that report that we did, I want to tell you about one other thing. We just completed a brand new survey to benchmark U.S. bicycling participation. As you might know, we are woefully short on data about who actually bikes in the United States. So we did a 10-minute online survey. We surveyed 16,000 adults and they spoke for almost 9,000 children, so about 25,000 people across the country. The main goal was to get us the big number of how many people actually rode a bike at least once in the last year. And so the big number that we came up with is 104 million, which it means that 1 out of every 3 people in America rode a bike in the last year. So it's designed as a benchmark so that we can then go back and measure change over time, but it's good to actually have a number that we're comfortable with. As a part of that survey, we were also able to dive into demographics of who rides bikes by income, by race and ethnicity, and also ask some qualitative questions. So I want to just show you 5 slides of some of those high-level results. We are just diving into this participation study, so there will be more information coming as we're able to do more cross-tabulations. This is the first release of this information, so join me on a really quick tour. The percentage of Americans who bike at least 1 time per year, according to our study, 26% of the white population, 26% of the Black population, 38% of the Hispanic population. So this is consistent with what we've seen out of recent census numbers, is that there is strong participation from the Hispanic community. On the qualitative side, we asked 2 things. Would you like to ride a bike more often? And the Black and Hispanic population were even more enthusiastic than the white population. And also around the statement, is biking a convenient way to get from one place to another? Again, we saw more enthusiasm for biking from the Black and Hispanic population. We asked about the sort of the crux as we see around biking is that people don't feel safe. So we asked if people would bike more if they were protected bike lanes or similar facilities were in place. And again, the response was even higher from the Black and Hispanic communities than from the white community in this new survey. An interesting note for folks working to increase biking among those populations, when we asked when we looked at what percentage of the population had never ridden a bike, so hadn't ever learned to ride a bike, 18% of the Black population, 17% of the Hispanic, and compared to only 10% of the white population. So that might be an area of emphasis for folks working in these communities. And then we asked about, do you have an operational adult bike in the household as a measure of, is that a barrier to biking? That barrier is higher in the Black community, but actually lower in the Hispanic community than in the white community. And then we also broke it down by income. When we looked at folks who had never ridden a bicycle at all, the percentage was higher in low-income households. So this was a household income of under $20,000. And again, the question of do you have an operational bike, lower income families are less likely to have an operational bike. So that is potentially another barrier to riding a bike that advocates and others could think about addressing. I'm going to leave it at that. This is the website, PeopleForBikes.org/participation is where you can get the release of the participation study. It was just released on Monday. It's only the high-level results for now, so watch for a deeper dive into this information coming forward. I hope it's helpful. One other resource I want to share is we are part of an effort called the Better Bike Share Partnership, along with City of Philadelphia, Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, and NACTO, the National Organization of City Transportation Officials, to help build more equitable and replicable bike share systems. So to improve the equity of bike share systems. So website betterbikeshare.org. We are on Facebook and Twitter. It's a relatively new effort, but we welcome your participation and ideas on how we, make the ridership of bike share look more like the population of the United States. So it's a really exciting effort. With that, I will stop and I will turn this over to Michael, or I guess back to Kit.
Yes.
To go deeper into the report. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. Well done. A great overview for us. And we have had quite a number of people join us since we first began. And what we'd like to do now is launch a poll because we would like to see how many people are watching with you at your location. So please take a moment to vote. We'd like to have a high level of voting. And as soon as we're getting pretty close to that 80% mark, we'll close out the poll. So please take this opportunity to vote. It's very important and gives a great deal of feedback to APBP and to People for Bikes Green Lane Project about the interest level in this area. So just keep it open a moment longer. Please go ahead and continue to vote. All right, and I'd like to close the poll now, and I will share the results with you so that you can take a look at what we're seeing as well. So congratulations to everyone who took the time to attend today, and now I'm going to send the poll or send the controls over to Michael Anderson, and I will close that poll as well. So there we go. Michael, you should see the controls coming to you now.
Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
There we go.
Welcome.
All right. So thanks so much for attending. I'm one of the two folks who were sort of in charge of compiling the report and talking to people in advance of it, finding out how it should be put together, what it should include. and worked with Mary Lauren Hall at the Alliance for Biking and Walking on that, and some of her colleagues there were also invaluable. So I want to talk briefly about this report, which we call Building Equity. We call it an idea book for fairer cities, and the ingredients, there's sort of three main parts of it. The bulk of it is interviews and profiles of 10 advocates of color around the country who've been working to support protected bike lanes in their areas, often not from what we think of as the biking world, but also people coming from many perspectives with many agendas, many values, and arriving for different reasons at the conclusion that part of their agenda, it would be improving the protected biking through communities that they're working in. So we'll have that. And another feature, we've got a sort of a section of international studies of best practices. We've got 3 analyses of things that are going right in other countries that we thought we'd introduce to the sort of stream of conversation and thought. And also a collection of fresh data about biking, broken out by race, ethnicity, income, both from the study that Martha reviewed. It has that and some other statistics sort of all in one place so you can look at it, and also harvesting studies from elsewhere that we thought were useful in both informing people who are perhaps bike people not used to thinking about equity, or equity people trying to learn more about biking, etc., trying to sort of give people a basic state of the practice and the academic and industry research about how these things all fit together, which of course they do. And finally, we talked to an advisory committee of 8 bike equity pros from around the country to sort of guide this and review the text as it was in progress. They did a huge job of helping us shape what we've got. I'm going to go briefly over the international section just to make sure it's clear what it includes. So we wanted to look at places not just in Europe that I think people in the bike world are used to talking about, but also places like Bogota, Colombia in the lower right there, and Hangzhou, China in the upper left. You can see the awesome bike lanes here, and you can see the people using them, demonstrating that, of course, this is a great idea in many contexts. You don't have to be in Denmark or in Boulder, I suppose, to enjoy them. So we talked about that a bit, but mostly I'm going to focus in this presentation on sort of 6 useful things we've learned. Like Martha said, we're basically an organization that focuses on infrastructure and have been awakened to the fact that that's obviously a tiny part of how we need to communicate with cities and help cities communicate with their constituents. And the, I guess if we can bring something useful to the conversation about equity, which is of course essential in all of this, it's maybe to sort of come from the perspective of an organization that is working perhaps belatedly or sort of making efforts to integrate equity thinking into a conversation and a set of expertises that may not be may not have originated from that place, if that makes sense. So here are the big ideas that sort of we have taken away from this, from the process of writing this report, gathered from these experts we've talked to, and are trying to disseminate some of them here to you. And we'll, of course, you can learn more about each of these in the report. I'll go through them. Here's what I think is the single most important principle of equity in biking. It's possibly obvious to those of us on this call. It's probably not obvious to millions of Americans. It's very simple. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to ride a bicycle for transportation. There's a lot of evidence for this. This is from the census in the upper right. This is from the National Household Travel Survey in the lower left. Both of them show similar trends that though biking is a very income diverse activity compared to most other modes of transportation, it is most important to the people among us with the least income. And there are obvious reasons for that, but it's a central principle and a reason that this all makes sense. The other thing I'd like to sort of help people have data to bust the myth of is that the truth is that there are two categories of people more than any others leading the modern biking boom, and those people of color and older people. If you look at the numbers here, again, this is NHTS data on the left. Though biking is certainly increasing among the young and among the white, it is increasing much faster among people of color and among the older folks. It's no longer the case, if it ever was, that biking is a thing that white college kids do, and it is ever less true, which is a happy situation. Here's a fellow that helps illustrate this, and I'll be trying to integrate the stories from the report that illustrate these ideas. His name is Angel Mescane. He's the staffer for CB11 in East Harlem in New York, and he, as described in the report, was sort of one of the movers in a process of trying to get protected bike lanes that had been installed downtown on First Avenue moved uptown into East Harlem. East Harlem is sort of a key area for the trends that we've been talking about among people of color. It's largely a historically Latino area, and it has the highest biking rates in the city after sort of the close-in parts of Brooklyn and downtown Manhattan near the universities. And that is because it's a very sensible way to get around, especially once you're out of the thickest part of the transit grid. And Angel was instrumental in sort of helping people in CB11 understand the ways that protected bike lanes could be installed in a road redesign that reduced air pollution and extended the comfortable biking benefits that have been enjoyed downtown into the East Harlem area. Another key concept here that I think was maybe my most important revelation in preparing this was that there's a link between a lot of these advocates, people who are not fighting for biking so much as they are fighting against space for cars. That's not necessarily against cars, we'll get to that in a moment, but against space for cars. Here's on the left, that is Nancy Halpern Ibrahim of Esperanza Community Housing in Los Angeles, south of downtown. She's been helping with the advocacy on Figueroa Street. That's the lower right. You can see the before and after plans, because she's been involved in the creation of Mercado La Paloma, which is a sort of a collective space for restaurants and other startups. There are many owned by mom and pop shops trying to create cafe sorts of food with traditional nutritious food in an environment that she sees as having been retrofitted over the years for an auto-oriented lifestyle that's associated with university students in the area, people downtown who are coming in cars, not part of the community. She calls the area a food swamp. It's not that there's no food, it's the food is dangerous. And she sees that as being the result, inevitably, of a community environment that's built around the car. Many of Mercado La Paloma's customers, of course, are coming in by foot and bike and transit, and she sees Figueroa as a key way to improve that flow of customers, and the health of the community is to make it a better place for humans rather than just machines. This is Nedra Detweiler in Atlanta. That she's riding a bike there down Auburn, which is related to her business. She runs a little business called Civil Bikes. It leads tours of civil rights history there in the area. So she's just down the block from the Church Ebenezer Baptist, where Dr. King preached and launched SELC and SNCC and so on. And so there's this rich history in the area, and she's also really into her community that has sort of had a rough 70 years or so since the freeway went in, cutting it off from downtown. A lot of the middle-class folks have moved out, leaving a relatively lower-income neighborhood that doesn't anymore have public spaces together. And so she's very passionate about making the stoops and sidewalks and plazas and so on places where for sort of non-organized but community-controlled spaces that are not dominated by automobiles. Protected bike lanes are part of that, not just for her customers, but also for her neighbors. Another key concept that I think is people run into a lot when trying to figure out the messages to give to people coming at this all from different perspectives. It's not necessarily a good idea to disparage cars, and that's something that a lot of bike advocates have had to learn the hard way, I think, and tried to understand why. And so we thought about why this is, talked with a lot of people about this trend that's popped up in lots of cities. And one way of thinking about it, I think, is that driving tends to be most strongly associated with social status in places and communities where it's correlated to wealth. That could be a geographic or a cultural community, etc. Here's a fellow that helped us understand that, Albus Brooks. He's a councilman in Denver. And he actually joined one of our study tours, rode around in Copenhagen, had a fantastic time. He'd never ridden a bike in his adult life, never owned a bike. He bought one as soon as he got back, sort of a Danish-style city bike, and decided that he had been so physically happy in Copenhagen that he was going to try and help other people understand how great it was. So he wrote it to a meeting of middle-class black leaders. And he said that when I got into the room with my helmet on, people looked at me as if I was an alien. And that really hammered home, both for us and for him, the phenomenon of why this might be. And one reason that we think that, one thing that's a factor here is that car ownership is much lower in communities of color. And most of all in the African American community. You're 3 times more likely to not own a car if you're black in the United States than if you're white. And a sort of perverse effect of that is that it becomes much more closely correlated to the wealth of your household and therefore with your status. And so a key reason why I think, in some cases, a key reason why there is a greater stigma around non-car ownership is that in communities where it is not the default for somebody to own a car, there's a more clear association with class and status. And that's an important thing to remember here and understand. A fifth of our 6 lessons, just because a bike user would prefer to be driving a car, that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve good biking. I think that's maybe something that's obvious or seems intuitive, but if you turn it around to different angles, it may not be. Here's a different way to say the same thing. In addition to improving biking for those who want to ride more, we also have to improve it for those who want to ride less. We have this principle that's well known in the biking world about serving the interested but concerned, people who wish they could ride more but aren't. And I think that that's essential and valuable and applies in lots of these situations, no matter race and class and so on, but it ignores the fact that lots of people who are riding now would like to be riding less. But that doesn't mean that they're any less invested in biking at the moment. It doesn't mean they have any less right to be biking. I think a key effect of that, and something that follows from that principle, is the idea that we can't build our planning processes, either as cities or as advocates or as consultants, whoever we're doing, simply by waiting for people to say, we want this in our area. Because the people who would like to be biking less, who would drop by a car at the drop of a hat if they could, may not be able to right now, we should be helping them. We should be helping them get the job that they need to buy a car, if that's what they want, right, by making it better to bike. But if if advocacy is driven entirely by requests, then you're going to come up with that's a sort of structural way to lead to things being improved in wealthier areas or better connected areas, et cetera. One person who exemplifies that lesson for us is Marvin Norman. He's president of the Inland Empire Biking Alliance in sort of inland from Los Angeles, and he's a substitute teacher. He started riding when he realized that he was going around spending a lot of money on his car and didn't really need to, and thought he'd get a bike. And so then he became interested in ways that the Inland Empire sort of suburban community could be improved for biking, started Googling for it, and then has gotten really into Dutch and Danish biking designs. I think he's in the Netherlands right now on his second visit there, learning about this. But the thing that drives him crazy, as we described in the report, is going to neighborhoods where he might be teaching and seeing lots of black and brown people, low-income people, riding bikes on unimproved streets without bike infrastructure, and then going to wealthier communities and seeing fewer people on the street on a bike, but much better infrastructure, and trying to figure out how that is, why that's the case. It's the problem, as he sees it anyway, is that the folks at the cities and the advocacy groups need to be instead of waiting for people to come to them, they need to be going to other people. They need to be sort of systematically thinking, we need to approach our priority list not based on requests, but based on needs. Last lesson that we came away from here, and that's very simple. Bicycling infrastructure is an ingredient, it's not a recipe. It's important, it's a necessary part of the city, but it's not the only thing that we should be working on. It's our specialty, but we need to, at the Green Lane Project, we need to be working and helping cities understand how to talk about the fact that there are lots of things involved in biking. The fellow who understands that is Bruce Woods. He's the president of the National Brotherhood of Cyclists, sort of an umbrella group for major tailor groups, and he's on the board of Bike Pittsburgh. He likes to ride his bike. He likes to ride for exercise, for health. What he told us was that he is passionate about the big improvements that they've had in infrastructure under Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh, but the higher priority for him, if he had to choose, is to get people understanding how to ride and what it means to ride, and to create educational programs for, as he described it, people in inner city Pittsburgh to feel that this is something that can be done, and that'll supplement all the work that needs to simultaneously be done on infrastructure. I think the common rule of thumb is that it's something like 2/3 infrastructure, 1/3 advocacy is a good ratio for priorities, and that's a whole lot of programming that needs to be completed. So you can learn more about all these people and their ideas and our analysis of what's going on here in this report. You can read it at this short link, bit.ly/buildingequity. You can get hard copies, email info@greenlaneproject.org, and we'll get them to you. And you can share your own wisdom. We'd love to hear what you thought about this on Twitter or Facebook. You can email me. I'll be writing more blog posts about this in the next few weeks, and I'd love to integrate wisdom from you guys. And also from Gemma, who is about to talk about his work in San Francisco. But I guess I'll first pass it back to Kit.
Michael, thank you so much for an excellent presentation, and we're thrilled here at APBP to have an opportunity to help you showcase this new report from the Green Lane Project. So thank you, and hopefully everyone has seen this now, and we will post the link to APBP's website as well, and we will now switch to Chema. So if you have a question for any of our presenters, feel free to enter it into the question box, and we will answer as many questions as possible after Chema's presentation. Welcome, Chema.
Hi, hi everyone. Let me bring up the presentation. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, it looks beautiful.
Perfect. So my name is Chema Hernandez-Gil. I'm a community organizer at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. What my job really entails is to not only build a bikeable San Francisco, but also a more equitable San Francisco. So a little bit about us. We're a nonprofit founded in 1971. We're one of the oldest bike advocacy groups in the nation. We only work in the city and county of San Francisco. Over the years, we've evolved into a very effective alliance of about 10,000 members. But one of the biggest challenges that we have had over the past few years is broadening our work into poorer and more marginalized neighborhoods here in San Francisco. What this led to is, over the last few years, a very intentional effort to expand our work to be more inclusive, and we've been actually quite successful in making this happen. Now, it is a challenging panorama, so I don't know if you can see the figures right there, but when we looked at the numbers, when we spoke with different communities, in considering our own limited resources as a nonprofit, we initially focused on broadening our outreach to two specific communities, Latinos and Chinese San Franciscans. As you can tell, there are very substantial disparities in income, and this is actually growing. The number of poor people in San Francisco has been growing over the past few years, much like the number of very wealthy people in San Francisco. So this was what we had to deal with and contend with when we first started this work of broadening our programmatic and policy work. What this led is about 6 months of sitting down with dozens of community groups with two goals. One was to learn about their mission, learn about their communities, what their priorities were, but simultaneously share what our vision was. So here I'm showing a map of connecting the city. This is our one of our principal frameworks for the work at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, connecting the city with protected bikeways 8 to 80. We also emphasized the fact that we were there to develop long-term working collaborative relationships. This was a very important lesson for us to learn, because what we had heard from community groups is that they weren't necessarily very enthusiastic about working once or twice with a group like ours. They wanted to really develop that relationship. But ultimately, our goal was to spend those few months really getting to know community groups. And it is going to be an ongoing process, but we definitely made a effort to sit down with people and not propose anything, just listen. What we got out of it is that there were common causes, right? Not necessarily what we expected, not ultimately around building protected bike lanes for the sake of building protected bike lanes, but that there were ways we could work together. Every single group we spoke with acknowledged the value of biking as an affordable way of getting around the city. It's a small city, San Francisco. It's 7 by 7 miles, less than 50 square miles. But advocating ultimately for protected bike lanes was not a priority for the community groups or their constituent members. And this was really the key development, I think. We knew that we wanted to work with these communities, but we didn't have those relationships. So we reached out to the grass tops, to the people who had relationships with these community groups who could help us introduce our vision to them. So this led to our first series of programmatic collaborations. And I believe it was Martha who mentioned what we heard was the fact that people just didn't have bikes if they weren't already biking. So we started working with two small but very effective and well-respected community groups who were working on transit issues and environmental justice issues. One of them is primarily Latino. The other group is primarily African American. And we work and facilitate access to bicycles for their youth and some of their constituents. And again, this was all with the idea that this would be a long-term project that would then give way to issues of advocating for policy, not only around protected bike lanes, but also interesting common causes such as funding. I'll get to that a little bit later. We focused always on making sure that we reiterated time and time again that this was for us a long-term goal, a long-term strategy, and something we were committed to. From then, it gave way into the first forays of policy work. We had been successful at holding, at this point, about 10 or 20 community bike build events. We had a good working relationship with a lot of these groups. And we were ready to sit down and build a not only a base of support, but something that could be described as a long-term commitment. So when we found out that there was an added value to us as an organization beyond biking, and for a lot of these community groups, it was our knowledge of City Hall and the processes that go about changing our streets. They were interested in hearing about our relationships with City Hall, with the different supervisors, with the SFMTA, Department of Public Works. They wanted to hear about our knowledge in organizing members, our own members, into going into these meetings, our insider knowledge about the budget process. This was a real added value that was, frankly, a little bit unexpected, right? They were able to see the value to their own advocacy work, to their own ways of making their neighborhoods and their communities better. right? So this led to the Vision Zero Coalition that was started about a year and a half ago. We were able to reach out to a lot of the community groups that we either were already working with or have sat down with over the past 2 or 3 years, and start advocating for something much more inclusive. Now, if you're not familiar with Vision Zero, it's a very simple framework. The idea is to eliminate within a given amount of time all injuries and fatalities within a given jurisdiction. For here in San Francisco, it's 2024. But it's being led both by the city but by the Vision Zero Coalition, which is about 20 or 30 community groups working in tandem together to be advocating for protected bike lanes, for wider sidewalks, for bulb outs, pedestrian improvements, that sort of thing. So it definitely a very interesting effect of this first work around building relationships with the poor communities. One large motivating factor for their involvement was that as we started looking at the numbers of collisions, of injuries, a lot of the people being injured, a lot of the people unfortunately being killed on San Francisco streets were predominantly people of color, seniors, people who really were very vulnerable because they were not able to afford a car, right? So this was definitely something very important. We got a lot of support for people biking from community groups that had never really thought of themselves as being transportation advocates just because of the social justice question. Now, the next step, and what we're now working on, is, again, a common cause, the ballot box, transportation funding. So, again, it's very important to building protected bike lanes. We need money. We need to make sure that there's enough funding so that we can continue with these projects. But working with these community groups in developing frameworks that would allow transportation funding to be equitable and distributed across all mode shares was something that was very important to us and to them. And again, our knowledge of a city hall, of the processes surrounding a lot of this transportation funding, really was very helpful in beginning the conversation and continuing the conversation. I think something I definitely want to mention is that a key part was how to model our work on complete streets around this. We have had quite a bit of success advocating for complete streets that include only some bicycle improvements, but wider sidewalks, transit improvements. People understood that we were coming from a legitimate place and that really we were interested in working to improve their communities. We've really made a very strong effort not to be seen as outsiders, but as part of the community. And ultimately, that brings us to our end goal. As I mentioned, every single community group we spoke with understood the value of biking. And when we started looking at the figures and looking at this question of how much money people are spending on transportation and transportation expenses in San Francisco, it was really quite overwhelming. We saw that there were neighborhoods, primarily poor neighborhoods of color, that were spending very, very substantial percentages of their income on transportation due to the fact that there weren't many transportation options in the neighborhoods. There wasn't good transit, so people had to have cars, or if there was transit, they had to spend a lot more money than they expected if they have children, that sort of thing. So that became part of the goal, really trying to achieve transportation justice with bicycles and just being a small part of it. This is connected and meshed very well with our goal of connecting the city and achieving Vision Zero with the subtext of alleviating the economic burden of getting around the city. So what I'd like to finish with is saying that for us, the lessons have definitely been this question of dialogue, beginning a dialogue, but making sure you have that commitment and that long-term view, being patient and being willing to listen to criticism. A lot of these groups had very legitimate concerns. This question of gentrification came a couple of times. People expressed concerns about it, but it wasn't necessarily that they saw biking as a threat, as a amplifying effect, but they saw the changes that were coming out from the outside as something that made them be concerned. Ultimately, the way we've been able to sell protective bike lanes is they're not a panacea. They're not going to alleviate all of your concerns, but they can address some of them. And we are willing to help you and work with you to share skills so that you can then go on and change other things in your communities. So thank you for the time, and I'll pass it on.
All right. Thank you, Chema. Great job. Really appreciate it. All right. So what we will do now is we will go to a Q&A, and we do have some questions already. So let's start with a question that we received actually in advance, and this question we will direct to Chema, and that is, as a white male cyclist who works with social service providers to promote bicycling and equity, how can I convince the groups and clients I work with that bicycling is not just for white males?
That's a good question. It's something we heard a couple of times here. What we actually were very successful in doing is trying to bring people together through focus groups. So what we often heard, usually from some of these community leaders, is exactly that. Biking is not something our community does. So what we said is, well, let's sit down with your constituents. Let's sit down with your members, with your clients, and see if this actually pans out, or if there's something that might be of interest to them. Every single time we sat down, and whether it was day laborers, whether it was youth, whether it was even older women, older African-American women, they either biked or were very interested in biking, right? So what my answer to it would be, try to sit down with the community groups. The numbers really seem to indicate that it really isn't only white males biking. It's very diverse. Unfortunately, they're to a certain degree marginalized.
Okay, thank you. And I see Michael.
Could I add to that a bit?
Oh, please, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I think that sounds exactly right to me. And I think that some of the understanding the phenomenon is maybe even easier if we can think about some of the data showing that there's a disproportionately high level of people in communities of color that don't own a bike, at least in black communities, and also a disproportionately large number of people in black and Latino communities, Asian communities, that don't ride ever. So, like, I think there's a sharper and more polarized divide, I guess, within communities of color between people who do identify strongly with riding and people who do not, and that shows up in conversations, especially, I guess, with elites sometimes. And so it's important, I guess, to think about the fact that broadening the conversation also broadens the perspective of somebody in one of those groups, possibly.
All right, thank you, Michael. And I see that you sent me a link to your slide presentation, so I have just shared that on the screen, or actually through the message chat box, question box with everyone. So we'll send that out afterwards. And Martha, you had been asked a question that others might be interested in as well about, are the results of the biking survey published or available for download? And that's a question from John Mark.
Yes, PeopleForBikes.org/participation will take you to the top line results of our new study. As I said, we will be releasing deeper dives into some of these, the specific topic areas in the coming weeks, but quite a bit of information is there on the website, including the report, the methodology, and some other pieces. So PeopleForBikes.org/participation.
Great, good, thank you. And Juana made the comment that she wanted to thank everyone for putting the webinar together. The benchmarking report looks really good and is so statistically strong, so thanks for that. Randy asks, Michael, if you would please post a link to the report. So Michael, if you'll reply all to Randy's question, I think then that will come up on everyone's individual screen in the question or chat box. And a question for Chema. Does the Vision Zero Coalition include any neighborhood groups that have historically opposed protected bike lane, safe street, or road diets? And that's from Esther.
Yes, it does include a couple of community groups like that. Interestingly enough, there's still a diversity of opinions within the Vision Zero Coalition around certain projects. What it has allowed us to do is to bring people to the table to really be able to understand why certain groups are advocating for certain projects and others aren't, right? Instead of being able to meet only once or twice a year at a city hall meeting, we've now been able to really take it out of that context and get to know each other, right? So what we've been able to do is share some of this data that is that we're using to justify a protected bike lane, for example, and try to persuade these groups that it is the best thing to do. And sometimes we don't necessarily agree, but the Vision Zero Coalition has been able to continue existing despite these differences of opinion. So I definitely expect that over the next few years, as people get to know each other, this is going to happen less and less, but it definitely has happened and is happening still.
Thank you. And Martha, a question from Hillary. How you're approaching green lanes or protected bike lanes changing as a result of the research that you've been doing?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yes, I think so. You know, PeopleForBikes is a biking organization, but what we have learned in working with the cities, with city leaders, with community groups like San Francisco Bicycle Coalition and others, is that for a long time, the main push for better bike infrastructure and better biking came from people who love bikes, who want to ride bikes, who want to be safe riding bikes. I would say the biggest change that I've seen in the last few years is a lot of other folks are seeing the value of bikes as a tool for better cities, whether it's from the economic development side, you know, making your city competitive for those coveted 25 to 34-year-olds, whether it is reducing fatalities on your streets, whether it's improving job access, making your city more equitable by providing low-cost transportation. These folks who are getting on board, community leaders, they're not passionate about biking. They just see it as a useful tool in the toolbox. So I've seen that is adding a lot more power to the arguments around biking, that no, everybody doesn't have to ride a bike, but that bikes are a good piece of a multimodal transportation system, and a multimodal transportation system is a more just and equitable system, that it's not a monoculture anymore. So I'd say that's probably the most interesting thing that we've wrapped our heads around, especially as a biking organization. Again, it's a lesson in humility, that we're just one part of the picture and it's just one tool. And as Michael said, you know, infrastructure is just one piece of the equation. The human side, the human infrastructure, the community side is equally or even more important. One other interesting thread has been the changing face of public participation, that for a long time cities had one way of doing public participation around new projects, and that was, you know, go out and hold a public hearing, and the bike advocates would come and the neighbors would come, and, you know, but that doesn't reach a lot of different populations. So we're seeing a really new ways of thinking about public participation, engaging communities of all types in these projects, in a discussion about what their city should look like, what their street should look like.
Thank you, Martha. And here's a question that I think is a really good one. Is there a consensus definition for bike equity? And if so, what is it?
I can speak to that a bit. I was actually just typing a response. So we did have a section of the report that shared some definitions. So I don't know if there is a consensus definition, but there was among the 10 of us or so we settled on, and that was the fair and impartial distribution of resources and opportunities. And that's more broad than just bike equity. In terms of bike equity in particular, anyone else have thoughts?
No, you go. You continue. You're on a roll here.
All right. Well, I guess I would say
Yes.
that I would say that the fair and equitable, fair and impartial distribution of the ability to ride a bicycle when you want to is relatively simple. The more complicated question then is, what are the barriers? And of course, those barriers vary by who you are, what your situation is, and the most important thing for us in this report was helping people understand the variety of different kinds of barriers there are, I think, to that equity. Some of it in, the feeling you have on the street because of the car, some of it in the feeling you have in the street because of your relationship with a policeman who might be there, right? And, a zillion other ways that different people will feel different things about that are stopping them from doing what they want to do, which of course is get on a bicycle sometimes.
Interestingly, I just saw yesterday that there's a new police officer rating program, and I'm not going to remember the name of it right offhand, but I think there's a lot of conversation happening around law enforcement and equity, which is actually one of the next questions I'd like to pose to you all. And it's from Naomi for Chema and any of our other speakers who would like to weigh in. In terms of Vision Zero, what types of equity-based benchmarks are being collected so far? And concerning enforcement around Vision Zero, as social justice groups move toward police reform, especially around issues having to do with racial profiling, how are these types of conversations being addressed, or how can we better address them as more communities adopt Vision Zero policies? We want the police officers to be part of the progress, obviously. Chema?
So that's a very important question, and something definitely that we're still discussing internally within the Vision Zero Coalition, and that I fully expect is going to take several years at least to fully understand. What the Vision Zero Coalition has been calling for since the beginning has been fair enforcement. And what that means is focusing on the behaviors that are actually killing and injuring people, right? What this usually means is that we should be focusing on enforcement of behaviors such as car speeding or not yielding to pedestrians, right? And we want to see the SFPD focus on these issues, right? It's a very data-driven approach, and it's something that everybody has felt comfortable going forward with. Of course, we can call for this, but without the numbers, without being able to really benchmark how successful enforcement is and how fair it is, we need to we've needed to be more persuasive. So what we've been successful is getting from the police department data on the types of citations being given out and where they're being given out, right? The result is, unfortunately, that out of the dozen or so districts, police precincts, there's only one that is fulfilling the criteria for fair enforcement, right? In the case of one district, I believe, I don't want to make up figures, but I think a majority of the citations being given out in this district or police precinct is being given out to pedestrians and people biking. Right. It also happens to be one of the one of the poorest neighborhoods, predominantly people of color. So we have the data. We need to be able to digest it and really come to a consensus as to what we're going to do about it. But we definitely have very clear requirements and vision for what we want to see from enforcement, from the enforcement side.
Great, thank you. Well, that concludes the questions, the question time, although there are several others that I think we're really eager to get to. So perhaps as I'm showing the very last slide in our deck, I can ask the question posed by Ben, why is gender not a factor in the Building Equity Report?
It was not the focus of this report, but I will be giving a presentation on the gender breakdown from our new participation study at the League's Women's Forum on Tuesday in Washington, D.C. So if you're at the National Bike Summit, please come to that event, and we will be doing a breakdown report on what we learned from our new participation study around the gender issues. We have to bite off one thing at a time, so this one was about race, ethnicity, and income, but very much related to the issues around women and biking.
Well, with that, thank you so much to our presenters, to Martha Roskowski, to Michael Anderson, and to Chema Hernandez-Gill. Thank you to each of you who participated today. We're grateful for your attendance. We hope that you will pass information about this publication to your colleagues, and we will post the link at apbp.org and also send a follow-up email. With that, I wish each of you a good day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.